Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rajesh Merchandani. I'm the Vice President for Communications and Policy Outreach here at the Centre. I'm delighted to welcome so many of you here for today's event. The title is Argentina's Path to More Open Markets, Lessons from Brazil and Beyond. The new government in Buenos Aires has taken quick steps that send a strong message to the world. Argentina wants to open its markets more. President Mauricio Macri, within weeks of being sworn in, moved to ease currency controls, trade taxes, and to settle that long-running dispute with US hedge funds over Argentina's default 15 years earlier, a dispute that had seen it frozen out of international capital markets and consequently seen its international reserves depleted. Now, even though Macri's plan has not passed Congress yet, and he doesn't have a majority, remember, he does have support for his idea of opening up Argentina more to international markets. Today, we're going to hear what the challenges might be that lie ahead and how Argentina should respond. We're particularly looking across the Iguazu Falls to Brazil, Argentina's biggest trading partner, whose economy is in recession and expected to shrink by 3.5% this year, and where, as we all know, political turmoil runs amok. Twice a year, we gather some of the brightest minds on Latin American economics together. They are the Latin America Shadow Financial Regulatory Committee. CLAF is the Spanish acronym. And they've been locked away in a room for 3 days together, feverishly discussing what Argentina should do. I'm not kidding about that either. Today, we bring them back blinking into the daylight to give us their wisdom. There are quite a few of them, so let me introduce them to you now. On the stage, we have half the committee. We couldn't fit them all on. So half are on the stage, half are on the front row. We have Guillermo Calvo, the Professor of Economics at Columbia University, former Chief Economist at the Inter-American Development Bank. Next to him, Alberto Carrasquilla, Professor of Economics at the Universidad de los Andes, former Minister of Finance in Colombia. Roque Fernandez, many of you will know, Professor of Economics at SEMA University. Did I say that correctly? Former Minister of Finance in Argentina. And Ernesto Talvi, many of you will also know, Director, the Brookings Ceres Economic and Social Policy in Latin America Initiative. And of course, certainly not least, but last in the introductions, our very own Liliana Rojas Suarez, President of CLAF, and a Senior Fellow here and the Director of our Latin America Initiative. And then, on the front row, let me ask you just to stand up briefly when I mention your name. Pablo Guidotti, Dean of the School of Government at the Torquato di Tella University, former Vice Minister of Finance in Argentina. Laura Alfaro, the Warren Albert Professor at Harvard Business School and the former Minister of National Planning and Economic Policy in Costa Rica. Pedro Carvalho de Melo, International Coordinator, FGV Management, and the former Director of Securities and Exchange Commission of Brazil. And Guillermo Perry, non-resident fellow at CGD and also the former Minister of Finance in Colombia. It's a pretty accomplished panel. I'm sure you will agree. So, you'll have seen the statement, the mini report that CLAF published, literally late last night. You can probably feel it's still pretty warm from the photocopier and the presses. That's how current this is. It contains their assessment of Argentina's situation, and also what they think, with their macroeconomic expertise, Argentina should do to make sure that its move to more open markets is as smooth as possible. I'm going to get Liliana Rojas Suarez to just present to you now, give you an overview of their thinking. This is what they've been deliberating for the last several days. What are the challenges and what are their specific recommendations? You can follow in the report if you'd like, but I'm going to hand over to Liliana now. Thanks, Liliana.
Hello, thank you, and welcome to the presentation of our 35th, I believe, statement of CLAF. Well, this time, for the first time after 12 years, we decided to deal with the issue of Argentina, especially because expectations of Argentina performance have certainly improved with the election of the new government. Well, it is widely known by all of you that the new elected government faced and is facing multiple distortions at the time that it took power. You are, of course, aware of the high fiscal deficits above 8% of GDP, the lack of access of international markets, capital markets due to the debt restructuring problems, the monetization of the fiscal deficit that resulted in inflations that reached over 40% in 2015, the almost frozen public sector services like electricity, gas, and transportation in the context of very high and increasing inflation, and the imposition of high controls to foreign exchange that basically dried up completely foreign direct investment in the context of a parallel exchange rate that was 50 to 70% above the official rate. Now, add to this inheritance the extremely difficult external environment that emerging markets are facing now in general, characterized by the sharp slowdown in capital inflows, China's deterioration, the deterioration and decline in commodity price, which in the case of Argentina reflects strongly in the 50% decline in soy prices, and troubles in Brazil, Argentina's main trading partner. If you combine the initial conditions in Argentina plus the external environment, you can picture the enormous challenge faced by the Argentina's administration. Well, for those of you that have followed the press, you know that a number of measures have been taken in the first 100 days of the administration, and most of them has been to remove price distortions. And that includes the foreign exchange market has now been unified. It implied a 40% depreciation of the official exchange rate. The administered prices that I just mentioned to you of energy, public transportation, water, gas, and petroleum have been sharply increased and basically reducing government subsidies by 15% of GDP. And all export taxes, with the exception of soy prices, which will be decreased gradually, have been removed. Very importantly, in an effort to regain access to international capital market, the government have moved swiftly to resolve the outstanding problems with the related to the default situation and the arrangement with the holdouts. Now, in that very difficult environment, and given the fact that the government has already taken a number of policies in the right direction, the committee is quite supportive of those policies and believe that the best path of Argentina adjustments and reform should be characterized by two factors. First, and I'm going to explain why, gradualism, and second, the build-up of credibility to boost private investment. First, why gradualism? Why not do as we did in the 90s and just let the exchange rate go completely at whatever level we want? Let's bring down inflation to very, very low levels. Well, a gradual reduction of the fiscal deficit makes sense now, as the economy is experiencing a moderate contraction. And also you need to remember that the removal of price distortions are generating noticeable social costs. For example, the elimination of subsidies. There is a need, in the point of view of the committee, to contain the social cost of the reforms and of the adjustment policies so that the population actually support the total removal of distortions and that are growth enhancing. So you need to have a stable government that is going to be able to undertake the remaining policies. Moreover, the removal of distortions are more likely to generate a revival of growth in the future, which actually may contribute to the reduction in the fiscal deficit. Now, a gradual reduction in the fiscal deficit implies that there will be important financing needs. Actually, $32 billion in 2016. With an almost non-existent domestic capital markets and with the precarious ratings that Argentina faces internationally, access to the international capital markets are going to remain limited. This implies that Argentina is going to still need monetary financing. That's why inflation cannot come down completely and quickly. because how are you going to finance? How are you going to implement the gradual path? And so, as I'm telling you, the expectation or what the committee supports is that the deficit and inflation reduce not drastically, but continuously in the context of policies that are being taken with social approval, so as to ensure the stability of the new administration. Second, how to build credibility. And this is very important, right? Remember Argentina. We're talking Argentina here, a country that for so many years, if you ask what is the problem, there's no credibility in Argentina. So the committee then believed that the government needs to move beyond price adjustments and needs to develop a new, modern, and stable regulatory framework for public service and transport infrastructure that attracts investment in the severely undercapitalized sectors, basically public services, because there's a huge lack of adequate infrastructure. Reforms need to be institutional. They need to include things like improvements in government procurement procedures, and seeking support for multilateral organizations to mobilize long-term external and domestic private resources seems highly adequate. Remember that the deterioration of institutions in Argentina have been huge. So building up credibility implies building up institutions. Moreover, for the reconstruction of credibility, the government needs to develop a well-designed and clearly announced plan to reduce inflation. So we agree that inflation should be decreased on a gradual basis, but there should be a well-defined plan. And we have two concrete policy recommendations. The first one is minimize sterilizing the creation of money expansion. For those of you that are not economists and don't know what sterilization is, basically when the government prints money and have the fear of generating inflation with that printed of money, then the central bank issues short-term debt to remove that money. The problem is that now you're changing a non-interest-bearing asset for one that actually pays interest rate that is also short-term, and so it really counts in the broader concept of money. But most importantly, by generating interest payments, you can create a debt spiral problem where you have higher debt, higher interest payment, then you have to issue more money to service those payments. So beware of sterilization. That has been a mistake in the past. Don't repeat it. And second, another experience from the past, not only for Argentina, for other Latin American countries, beware of a sudden increase in external debt issues by a number of provinces. Already the province of Buenos Aires has issued external debt at very high interest rates, and more provinces may follow. The ghost of excessive indebtedness in the provinces in the past and the federal government bailout of the late 90s that complicated Argentina's fiscal sustainability should not be forgotten. I'm going to stop here. Challenges are large, but if the two central principles for undertaking reforms recommended by the committee are followed, gradualism and rebuild of credibility, the two together, you cannot take one without forgetting the other one. The committee strongly believes in a much brighter future for Argentina. Thank you.
Thanks, Liliana. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to kind of look through the statement that CLAP issued this morning, let me just kind of run through some of the main points, the main recommendations. They talk about moving beyond price adjustments and developing new, modern and stable regulatory frameworks for public services and transport infrastructure. They talk, and Liliana just mentioned it, about developing and announcing a plan to gradually reduce the budget deficit and reduce inflation. The specific recommendation here is minimize this issue of sterilizing monetary expansion, which Liliana thankfully explained to the non-economists, including myself, in the room. Borrowing needs, she talked about, 2016, are expected to be $32 billion, of which Argentina may be able to access about $20 billion on capital markets. That in itself will be a test. So it's got to find this other $12 billion. So where's it going to find that, and what are the challenges and implications of that? There's a recommendation about federal governments and regions in Argentina not all rushing to try and access capital markets on their own, but the recommendation is they should coordinate their approaches to capital markets to avoid this problem of excessive indebtedness. And also they recommend that the government should prioritize attracting investment into public services and transport infrastructure, particularly from the multilateral development banks and the regional development banks. So let's dive a little bit deeper into some of those recommendations and some of the analysis that the committee has been giving. Let me direct the first question to our panelists on the stage, and this one particularly to Roque Fernandez, the former Minister of Finance in Argentina. And this is this question, this recommendation about increasing investment in public services and the transport infrastructure in Argentina. Just talk to us a little bit about that, what that means exactly, and how you think Argentina should do that.
Well, what happened in the last decade is that the railroad system and the infrastructure of Argentina was totally abandoned, in the sense that there was no new investment significantly increasing the needs of the transportation of Argentina. So there are several projects.
Speak up, he cannot hear you.
There are several projects. For example, there is one particular one that, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. There is a particular one, for example, connecting the railroad from the north of Argentina to Bolivia, that has already got the financing from an international organization, CAF, and have not been disbursed yet because of the problem that we were having in Argentina. So there are some of those projects that are almost ready to start, and some of them, they get the financing very easily. The other will have to produce the projects, analyze the needs, and go for an overall plan to finance those infrastructure problems.
Okay, Ernesto Talva, thank you, Roque. Ernesto Talva, let's bring you in here. Explain to us a little bit about how you think multilateral organizations can support this recapitalization of public services and investment in infrastructure projects. And, are there examples from international experience in this?
Well, this is a topic that I think we think is really key at this juncture, because not only there are some programs already in place, of which I would like Guillermo Perry, who is very knowledgeable on the subject, to talk about specifically. We live in a very different world today. I mean, interest rates are really extremely low, but they are very low only for very high quality borrowers. So there is a role for the international community to try to recycle part of those funds that today go to Germany or to Japan at negative rates back to emerging markets where high profitability, either social or economic projects, are available through the multilateral organizations, in the sense that they are able not only to borrow at very low rates, but they would also be able to monitor the quality of the projects, discuss with the governments the quality of the projects, and ensure that resources can be channeled at relatively low interest rates to high social profitability projects, in a context in which really world interest rates are tremendously low, and there is an enormous amount of liquidity available that could be recycled back to emerging economies. So it's not only something that would be important to do for Argentina. I mean, this is a much more general problem in a context in which all the emerging economies, but especially Latin America, are cooling off very, very significantly.
I just want to follow up on a question here from the perspective of a non-economist. If you're attracting outside investment into public services and transport infrastructure in Argentina, does that effectively mean selling it off?
It doesn't necessarily mean selling it off. You have many institutional models in which you can pursue these kinds of investments. It could be concession, it could be private-public partnership. So you have a multiplicity of options. The important thing here, Rajesh, is that when we talk about structural reforms, we are talking of things that are very key and very important. For example, having a more dynamic international integration. But that has a lot of obstacles and a lot of negotiations that have to go on. It might take years until you eventually get to that. So you need things that can be done immediately to boost economic activity in Argentina and to boost employment. And the good thing about the undercapitalized public services sector and infrastructure is that this kind of investment creates immediate demand, so it's a boost for economic activity. It creates future output capacity, so that's also good. And it is pretty intensive in employing unskilled labor. So from a distribution of income perspective, it would be also a good idea. And then again, multilaterals could play a very large role in facilitating the financing of these endeavors at reasonable rates, but with not necessarily by privatizing, or I mean, it could be, but there are many other options in the menu.
Okay, thank you. Just a second, Pablo. Ernesto, you had mentioned Guillermo Perry. Could give us a couple of examples of how this has happened. So I'm going to ask for a microphone to be brought down with Brian. Where's our colleague? Okay, I'm going to go and get it. I don't know where Brian went, so I'll do it. Don't worry.
I can try.
Yeah, you can speak and
Well,
we'll
actually,
see.
remember we're webcasting as well, so let's get you a microphone. I'm just going to test it. Is the microphone on? Yes. Okay, Guillermo. Yeah, why don't you use this? Thank you.
Well, we talk in the statement that the idea would not be that multilaterals just finance all the infrastructure with their own funds, but that they use more innovative ways to make sure that they leverage private financial resources. As Ernesto said, actually there is a lot of money around trapped in some of the rich countries without significant investment opportunities, but they cannot go easily to a country like Argentina that doesn't have an investment grade or the credibility at the moment. And some examples of the kind of things that can be done are already being tried in several places. For example, the Global Infrastructure Fund of IFC, the Regional Infrastructure Funds of IDB, and perhaps even more related to this case, CAF has joined with private investors, with institutional investors, in creating infrastructure funds, both debt and equity funds, in national context. There is one already operating in Colombia. They have been designing this in Brazil, in Peru, in Mexico with Nafinsa, and this is working. And even more, we do believe that many of these countries have development banks that in the past were terrible, but that have modernized a lot and that can work together with the multilateral agencies in this. A special example of this is what is happening in Colombia with the Financiera de Desarrollo Nacional, which was before the financing of the expansion of the power sector. Once the power sector was privatized and there is a good regulation, we don't need that for the power sector. So this agency has turned to help mobilize long-term resources for concessions in transport infrastructure. And IFC, CAF, and now a private bank, Sumitomo, have joined as investors with the government in this national development banks. So you assure good governance. And actually, what they are doing is solving market failures, helping with guarantees, liquidity guarantees, and others. So they attract both international investors like investment funds or pension funds and local investors. The pension funds that normally have, or the insurance companies that would like to have long-term assets but need good quality of assets. And that's what the agencies can do. The other thing that is critical here, as was said in the report, is that you do have a good regulatory framework, an institutional framework. Argentina used to have a first-rate regulatory framework for public services. It was top-rate, as Chile. Danny Leipzig, that is here, remember when we, and Jim, when we work in Argentina, it was attracting a lot of private investment to energy, water development, other things, but it had a problem. It was linked with the convertibility. The tariffs were set in dollars. So when the devaluation came on, it blew in the sky and it was never replaced. So Argentina has been 10 years or more now with sectors with long-term investment that are undercapitalized, as Ernesto said, and that could have a huge investment in the short term if there was regulatory clarity of how tariffs are going to be set on that. So that's why we think that these are the two things that are key, that they do put in place as soon as possible a clear regulatory framework, probably with a regulatory agency that is relatively autonomous and whatever, and that they ask the multilateral organizations to help in this kind of way to help mobilize long-term private resources. This has been done in other places and can be done in Argentina.
Okay, Guillermo, thank you. Pablo, you had your hand up. Did you want to make a point on this? Let's bring you on this point. Why don't you stand up?
Yes, I just wanted to complement what Ernesto and Guillermo were saying, that really this is a point that is in the interest of the world economy.
Turn around and speak to them.
If we look at Christine Lagarde, that for some time has been talking about the new mediocre, if we look at what Olivier Blanchard used to talk about years ago about the need for rebalancing in the world economy, I think that one of the problems that the world economy has is that it really doesn't know how to resume growth. So in this sense, I think that the point of channeling resources that today are going essentially to the U.S. Treasury, to Japan, to Germany, to actually promote investment in emerging markets, in regions where there is a high undercapitalization and where the cost of financing projects in the market is, in the case of Argentina, is paying a significant additional risk premia because, of course, of the recent history. I think is a decision that we could perfectly imagine that has external effects for the world economy and then could be of interest for the international community to pursue more aggressively than simply through the normal channels of the development banks.
While I have you, don't sit down. As former Vice Minister of Finance from Argentina, I want to ask a question about this financing that Argentina is going to need. We heard from the committee $32 billion in 2016. How confident are you that Argentina will be able to obtain sufficient funding of that total from capital markets so it doesn't have to rely on printing money?
Yes, I think that it is a very important point. And I think that the way in which you have to interpret our statement is that we take essentially the view that has been proposed by the Argentine government, in part recognizing political constraints. It's a government that doesn't have majority in any of the two chambers of Congress. So they have manifested the intention to move gradually on the fiscal and monetary front. So we say, well, our task as committee is to really understand if such an approach makes sense. And we concluded that we see merit, but we need to be very careful about essentially announcing a clear strategy for deficit reduction, because we are concerned that the amount of financing that Argentina will require in the market probably will face not a significant challenge this year, where Argentina is essentially planning to issue about $20 billion, $12 billion to settle the problem of holdouts, and an $8 billion this is external financing, additionally in the year. But at the level of deficits that Argentina has, considering some of the tax reductions that have been already implemented, the possibility or the announcements today, Alfonso Pratgay was announcing a huge infrastructure plan of about $20 billion a year, okay? All these numbers have to be really seriously put together, and eventually the government will have to explain clearly how the financing will evolve in 2017, 2018, and that is essentially the reason why we say the issue of credibility in Argentina cannot be downplayed. And we feel that still, and maybe it's understandable because of these political dynamics, that still the government was putting all of its emphasis in passing the legislation that was needed in Congress to settle the issue of holdouts. So they have not been very clear about how the deficit reduction will occur and how the reduction in inflation will occur. But they have said, well, inflation we expect to fall down significantly the second half of the year, and they have announced some targets, but without details. I think it is imperative that Argentina in the next coming weeks spells out exactly how this gradual strategy will be effectively implemented in order to be credible. I think that the 20 billions that we are talking about external financing today clearly tests the limits of the market, and we know how the market works. The market is interested in selling bonds. So initially, always they will set it as a success story, but then the market may turn around very quickly, and Argentina then will actually have to abandon the gradualism and be forced into a much more severe adjustment.
Okay, thank you very much, Pablo. Let's bring in Alberto Carrasquilla, Colombia's former finance minister. Are there lessons for Argentina from your country's experience? I mean, you're doing well now, but Colombia's had periods of macroeconomic difficulties. There's a banking crisis in the 1990s. What are the lessons that Argentina can learn from Colombia's experiences?
Okay. Well, I thought that sitting in the middle of two brilliant Argentinian economists would save me from the hard questions, so thank you very much. I think that Colombia is a paradigmatic country in terms of implementing gradualist policies. Colombia has never experienced with shock therapy approaches such as happened in the 70s or in the 80s or even in the 90s in southern countries. And I think that the main lessons that I would study in looking at Colombia is the fact that gradualism may solve some problems when you don't have perfect access to capital markets. It can help you distribute the costs of implementing policies in time more efficiently, perhaps, than an abrupt program where you lack financing. And I think the important fact about Argentina is you have to implement a very ambitious program, a very important change of direction, and you don't have access to the capital markets, at least not a front-loaded access to capital markets. So a solution is a gradualist approach wherein you slowly build up your credibility and your market access, and perhaps answering your question, the thing I would emphasize is the gradualist approach that Colombia has always taken.
Okay, Guillermo Calvo, sitting next to Alberto there. Thank you for your patience, sir. Let's talk about this issue of sterilization, sterilizing monetary expansion, creating debt in order to kind of like soak up the money that's being printed. Has it been a problem in Argentina in the past or other Latin American or emerging market economies? Talk to us a little bit about that. And what are the lessons for Argentina from this?
Yeah, thank you very much. Obviously we have plenty of experiences where that thing it may blow up in your face if you are not careful, because high interest rates it could be a good stabilization policy for countries that have access to the capital market. But in this case, you may turn out just simply making a statement saying, I'm not going to make the adjustment now. I'm going to buy time and buy at a very expensive price, very high price. So next period, I will have the same problem as I have now, unless I do the adjustment. So postponing under conditions of low credibility is very risky. And a little bit that's what we're doing now, because interest rates are quite high. So on the face of that, you get a little bit worried. I hope that interest rates will go down. Now, let me make a point which I think maybe missed, and it's related to what Ernesto Talvi was just saying, that we live in a different kind of world compared to the 1990s, for example. We live in a world where there is a shortage of safe assets. And you see that happening everywhere in the advanced economies. The velocity of circulation has collapsed. There is kind of a liquidity trap. So the investor is looking for liquid and safe assets that are of a monetary nature. And you've seen that spreading to emerging markets or more mature emerging markets like Australia, for example. So there is an interest now, which was not present in the 1990s, about finding sovereign debt which can be reliable sovereign debt. And in my interpretation, that's something that we need to study more carefully. Maybe that partly explains the fact that in Latin America we had these very recent, very large devaluations in Brazil, in Colombia, in Peru, etc., all kinds of countries under different situations. And however, the pass-through to inflation has been relatively small. So in fact, under the perspective of somebody looking at safe assets, when you devalue, they say, oh, that's bad, because the currency has weakened. On the other hand, given that these countries have accumulated international reserves, when you devalue, the backup of domestic money goes up. Now you have more goodies in the bag, and therefore there are less chances of the thing just getting out of track into inflation. So previously we had that problem. Now, so for me that's an indication that the market it could be more friendly. Now, having said that, we should not forget either. Unfortunately, in economics, there's nothing that doesn't have a problem somewhere. And that's another thing that we learn. Another thing that we learn is be careful to be too successful, because you may be attracting, that's quite possible, that all of a sudden you say, oh, look, Argentina has done all of these important already structural changes, you can say, unification of the exchange rate, etc., and it's showing a will of continuing along that path. So you can have lots of hard capital going into Argentina, and all of a sudden the central bank finding itself with a flow of capital into the banking sector, a pressure to appreciate the exchange rate, and they will have a temptation to sit on that exchange rate. And look, once you do that, everything looks fine, because you start accumulating reserves. There is a mini boom in the economy. Fiscal revenues go up. So you do everything miraculously without having to do much of an effort from a fiscal point of view. So be careful with that. I hope, that would be a good scenario. But once we get there, maybe next year when we discuss it, we should warn the authorities, or they should be warned from now on, because this could be very quick, that if they are very successful, also look at the dark side of that success.
Okay, the dark side of success. We should have called this event the dark side of success. Lila, let's get a couple more members of the committee to give us their analysis, and then we'll open up to questions. I'm saving a question for you, Liliana, don't worry, in case you were wondering. Let's think about the regional perspective a little bit. We have representatives with expertise from Brazil and Costa Rica on the committee, so why don't we actually put you on the spot, Laura? You're smiling, I know, but you're not getting away without speaking today. Laura, former Minister of National Planning and Economic Policy in Costa Rica. Costa Rica's doing pretty well, really, in terms of, it's expanded as a market-friendly economic model. It's integrated into international capital markets. What did it do right? Did it have periods where it didn't do things so right? And what should Argentina be looking at? What are the lessons from Costa Rica for Argentina? I know it's a much bigger economy, but...
We never did anything wrong. No, the similarity that we have is shared also with Colombia. We had a period of very relatively high inflation, and I think the spirit of the committee is right in that this is one that doesn't require a shock therapy, but perhaps a credible approach to trying to reduce it gradually. And I think that the words that we keep repeating is this gradual and credible approach. I will let Pedro talk a little bit more, but we also discussed Brazil. At least for Costa Rica and Central America, Argentina is not perhaps a main trade partner, but it is for Brazil. Brazil is Argentina's main trade partner, and it's also the main trade partner in manufacturing goods. Brazil is going to very complicated times. It's an interesting country that has changed over the last 10 years. A middle class emerged. It's a vulnerable middle class, but it's a middle class, and the expectations of this middle class are very different. I think the politicians also didn't grasp that. So I think they expect more from their politicians. So Brazil is at a crossroad that I think it can come out strengthened institutionally and economically and socially. But because the problem is a political problem, it's very hard to forecast. So as the committee has stated, it continues to be a risk factor for Argentina, and one that we're all hoping will improve. But again, it depends on the politics.
Yeah, and we know that to use an economics term, your comparative advantage is the economics here. So let's stick to discussing that. And let's turn to you, Pedro Carvalho de Mello, former Director of Securities and Exchange Commission of Brazil. The committee says Brazil will continue to be a risk factor for Argentina over the short term. So let's think a little bit about that from the Argentinian perspective. How should Argentina approach that? Brazil is Argentina's biggest trading partner, after all.
Yes, I think that's the risk factor. On the other hand, as Laura said, I think Brazil is in a political turmoil, but is showing support for democracy, free press. So that could be a good example to Argentina, how to have transparency, how to improve credibility. In the medium term and short term, of course, the recession of the economy of Brazil this year, and perhaps next year less, will affect trade with Argentina, of course.
So what should Argentina do? I think President Macri is probably watching the live stream of this right now. Tell him what to do. He wants one policy recommendation from you.
Huh?
Apart from pray. All right.
No, I think when you talk about infrastructure in South America, there is the big challenge is how to organize infrastructure in South America in order to integrate countries. Maybe that's one thing that can be discussed between Argentina and Brazil. If they are going to invest more in roads and railroads and ports, to have a look for South American integration, not only for what Argentina needs.
Is there still this issue? I'm really putting you on the spot here, sorry, but I'm just interested to know. So recently, the former finance minister of Nigeria, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, wrote an essay for CGD that talked about what African policymakers need to think about right now. And one of the issues was this problem of cross-border integration, cross-border trade. The costs of taking goods across borders within Africa is extraordinarily high. Is that a similar problem with Latin America?
Yes, of course. And there's also an additional problem, is that Brazil and Argentina were always in the past looking to the Atlantic Ocean. And now the trade has moved to China, to the Asia. So I think the infrastructure has to be also connected how to give more emphasis to the Asian markets. Means that, again, more integration with the Andean countries.
Okay, Pedro, thank you very much for taking questions I know you weren't prepared for, but thank you. Okay, Liliana. Pedro talked about... Oh, Pablo, you want to make a point here before I come to Liliana? Okay.
I hope that Dilma is watching too.
She might be a little preoccupied, actually.
I think that there is
busy today.
I think that there is a major challenge that relates to Argentina and Brazil, and is the future of Mercosur. I think that historically, Mercosur was essentially almost a foreign policy instrument for Brazil to consolidate leadership in South America. And this consolidation of leadership came at the exchange of access to the Brazilian market. Okay? But today, with the Pacific Alliance and all of the other countries opening up, as Pedro was saying, to trade, and the new trade towards Asia, has actually, I would say, limited severely the role of Mercosur in Latin America, and none of the other countries extra Mercosur would actually be in a position to join Mercosur in the future, given the amount of protection. So I think that there is a major challenge, both for Macri, but fundamentally for the president of Brazil, to actually rethink Mercosur and opening up that region eventually to the other blocks. And this brings me to the very important point about infrastructure. In the case of Argentina, for instance, one of the projects that has been present for many years and has not been possible to be done because of lack of financing is actually a tunnel that goes through the Andes and connects Argentina with Chile, and actually would be a route to Mercosur. Okay, so that is the type of examples where maybe a joint approach by Brazil, Argentina, Chile could actually produce funding, but it needs to be, these are very large projects, but the idea that was explained by Ernesto is one of the ways in which I would say the world can actually say, look, why don't we think where is productive to use funds? And I think that in countries that are undercapitalized, that is the place to go.
Thank you. Very interesting point. Ernesto.
Rajesh, I just would like to add that maybe we should go even beyond what we are talking about. We are putting out with Tony Esteva de Ordal of the IDB a proposal. It's going to be launched. Sorry for the small little commercial at Brookings in April 12th on the
shame on you.
Shame on you. Yeah. Well, competition and cooperation, and no, but it is important. I mean, we are on the verge of signing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, negotiating transatlantic trade and investment partnership. So the proposal is, why not a Trans-American Partnership, a TAP? Already 11 countries in the region have free trade agreements with the US, and 7 of them have them with Canada. And essentially the suggestion is that with at relatively low cost, by simply harmonizing rules of origin to interconnect all these agreements and harmonizing trade facilitation regimes, we can create a huge economic space in the region, and countries in Mercosur that are one step behind could create a very important dynamics for countries in Mercosur to be interested in entering this kind of agreements. And so we need to think a little bit big in terms of how to integrate the region and how to promote global supply chains within the regions that today are very, very scarce.
Okay, maybe that is the subject for the next CLAF committee gathering retreat in a few months' time. Liliana, let's bring it back to Argentina. Argentina's path to more open markets. We've heard about the problems of Argentina's biggest trading partner, Brazil. We've heard about the slowdown in China, another big trading partner, the commodity price slump, which is affecting Argentina. Yet, your mini report, your statement, says it's cautiously optimistic with respect to Argentina. ¿Cómo? Yeah.
Okay, this committee is not characterized by being extremely positive about the future of emerging markets in the near term. In the past statements, we actually, if you joined us last November, I believe, was it? Yeah. We were actually quite pessimistic about conditions in China, conditions in Brazil. And so why are we cautiously optimistic on Argentina? Well, the answer has two parts. First, you have seen in the discussion among members how, in addition to talking about problems and the way to solve that, they're talking about how to build development from the point of view of infrastructure, collaboration between the region. I mean, there is a sense of constructing and producing, investing in more productive activities and generating growth. So that sense of moving forward is in Argentina and in many parts of the region. Second, really what is happening is not that we think that emerging markets' future in terms of access to international capital market has improved. No. We know, we are very aware of the volatility of international capital market, and it's very possible that in a couple of months from now, we are actually going to see more and stronger noises coming from both China, Brazil, and other emerging markets. The truth is that we are facing a race. The race is between the deteriorating conditions in emerging markets due to the instabilities in international capital markets and the build-up of credibility of Argentina. It's really a race. So will Argentina, and that's why our recommendations are, okay, take steps and take steps now. Because when international investors start deciding and reallocating resources between international capital about the world, about emerging markets, then they have to pick and choose. Will Argentina present itself as one that is actually going on the road upwards relative to other countries that have actually been giving signals of severe financing issues? So we are optimistic from that perspective because if things are done right, the move is upwards for Argentina.
Okay, good, thank you. Let's open up to some questions now from all of you who patiently sat and listened to our experts. We do have plenty of time for questions. We have a couple of microphones to go round. Actually, Pablo has one of them. Brian's down here. And we have another one there. So I'm going to ask you to put your hand up. And if I call on you, just stand up. We'll give you a microphone. Briefly say who you are, what your affiliation is. And then I encourage a brief and concise question as opposed to a statement. So, gentlemen, I think you had your hand up first with a pink tie, yes? And then that man over there. And then that man over there. And then we need a bit of gender balance. So, ladies, questions, please. Can we get a microphone to this man over here, please?
Hi, I'm Danny Leipziger from the Growth Dialogue and GW. Thanks very much to Liliana and the panel. I'm very much on board with where you came out, but I have a question on the infrastructure financing side, because at the end of the day, as Ernesto said, it has all these positives. And as Guillermo said, that's the big challenge. Why can't your committee be more bold? For example, think of the Marshall Plan.
We talk about it.
So think of consultative groups for developing countries. But as Guillermo and others, Calvo, have said, we're in a different world. We don't need consultative groups for Vietnam. We don't need Marshall plans for, well, we might need it for Europe again. But it seems to me that just saying the multilaterals should do more, and there's all this liquidity out there and all these good rates of return that could be intermediated if we had mechanisms, is one step short of really giving a policy push to a new idea, right? A new idea would be take the tunnel, take the road to Bolivia, take the port, take, you know, all these investment projects and get one of the multilaterals or all the multilaterals to host a conference on these are the investment opportunities in Argentina. Who's going to sign up? The CAF takes this one, you take that one, the Middle East takes another one. In other words, I think there's opportunity to be more bold than just the monetary side, because at the end of the day, as all of you have said, it's a very constrained environment. You have very few options. If you get more investment, you get more growth, the options start to look better, and the risks look a little less. So I think even though your committee is a monetary group, I think that if the 10 of you, or whoever you are, put forward an editorial in the New York Times saying, you know, have a consultative infrastructure group meeting for Argentina, that would be a good idea. What do you think, is the question.
That's the question, okay. What do you think? Okay, I'm just going to write that down. What do you think? Okay, that gentleman over there with the blue check tie, yeah.
My name is Johannes Smeets. I work in the Inter-American Development Bank as the Dutch representative. I have a question, and thanks for the very interesting analysis that you gave us. I have a question about the private sector perspective. So what I read is that, and what I heard before was that private sector development in Argentina was quite restricted as a result of taxation, as a result of all kinds of regulatory blockages. Which are the perspectives that you see, and also which are the signals that you get from the private sector? What do they think they need now most in order to, let's say, spread out their wings again? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And there was one more question. It was this gentleman in the black. Yeah, and then we'll get some more in a minute.
Hi, my name is Marcelo Haverberg. I used to be economist to Argentina at the IDB, Inter-American Development Bank. Actually, I am deeply surprised by the fact that this statement and the presentations made in this room doesn't include the political contest as a challenge to open the market. I believe that put together all these people to talk about the future of Argentina and don't talk about political issues is like to talk about fiction. So I would like.
Is there a question there, sir? Is there a question? Is there a question coming?
Yeah. A little. So I asked Professor Calv what he think about the possibility of the Peronist opposition be a big challenge to structural reforms and everything that the new president wants to do in Argentina.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's start with that first question from Danny Leipziger. What do you think? That was the question.
Guillermo raised his hand.
Really, basically, he's saying, you know, why don't you do a more bold, why don't you have more bold approaches rather than just monetary policy? Guillermo Perry, you're going to answer this question. Let's give you the microphone. Where is it gone? Okay, Mariam's bringing one to your. Who's going to get there first? Who's going to get there first? She got one.
Okay. Danny, the general thrust of the proposal is a call to the Multilateral Development Committee to be more bold, but not only on financing directly the projects, because after all, as you know, the amount of financing that is moved through the multilateral banks directly is just a portion of the needs for infrastructure in the developing world. So we cannot think only on Argentina and the South Econ. And that's why we are talking about more innovative ways in which you can leverage the resources of the multilaterals with private flows that actually are available because they are floating around in the rich countries without investment opportunities, very low, but don't want to go. They see too much risk in some of the. So that's the way that we think this can work, in the sense that the multilaterals, by joining and catalyzing, can improve the quality of these assets in the sense of making them more safe for the investors that are not only looking to more returns, but some degree of assurance. And that's why in the report, in the statement, we talk about the fact that this is already being done, perhaps in small amounts, in some of the countries in the region with CAF, some with IDB, some with IFC, but could be done in a more significant way. So we are not talking here, for example, about the story of Colombia, but I wanted to mention that the problem of gradualism adjustments at this moment is not only Argentina. There are many countries in the region that were doing very well, but they had a huge shock of terms of trade with the sharp reduction of oil prices and other things. And that has had an effect not only on the external situation, but also on the fiscal situation. So several countries in the region do need to make some adjustment now in a moment of deceleration, not only of the countries, but of the world economy. It would be inefficient that they do it in a very contractionary way, as it would be inefficient that Argentina does it as well. So this problem is a little bit more general. For example, in the case of Colombia, we are doing a gradual fiscal adjustment. And in the case of Colombia, of course, it's easier because it had built more credibility before. It's starting from a better point, and it has a fiscal rule, and it has some things that help. And it has put forward a more clear fiscal adjustment proposals for the future, which is what we think Argentina has not done yet. And need to do it, because you have to put some things on the table, like the regulatory frameworks of how tariffs are going to be managed. If you have a good regulatory framework in energy, private capital is going to flow to energy even without the multinationals. So the energy sector could be solved in a very easy way, in that way, but not roads. Transport needs really this kind of support. So we do agree that it's important to have a very bold thing, but it has to be done in a different way than in the past, with more participation of private capital and the multilaterals being more smart in leveraging the resources.
Okay. You know. Can we just pass the microphone to Pablo, who's going to make a point, and then Kim as well.
I really liked the point that Danny said and the way in which he said it. In fact, the word Marshall Plan actually came out at some point in our discussion, so I really like that. And I just was thinking, I think you're right, one should be bold, and this is a moment in which, for the reasons that Ernesto was saying, at the international level, there are resources, and one has to be bolder than simply relying to existing institutions. And I would say a large infrastructure investment in many developing countries or many emerging markets will also require skills that some of the countries may not have. So why not think that such an initiative could also help the migration, the refugees situation, and maybe channel some of these skills towards a productive investment for the world economy.
Okay, Ernesto, hold on 1 second. Guillermo Calvi, you want to come in on that point, and then we'll come back to Ernesto.
Yeah, no, it's related again to Danny's point, which I think is very well taken. But there is some sort of dissonance there between Marshall Plan and what you are suggesting. For Argentina to go forward and say, look, we have all of these opportunities, come and take them, is one thing. The problem is Argentina is not credible, so you need some help from your friends. That's where the multilateral institutions, I think, have a very, very large, well, you probably had that in mind too, but I'd like to emphasize that. And so it is precisely the bridge that those institutions can provide by sort of giving the seal of approval, if you wish, to that, that could make a big difference. I see what we need is some kind of a Draghi, Mario Draghi, who says, I do whatever it takes because I really believe in Spain and Italy. If you can say, if you guys can come forward, organize a conference, said, we believe in Argentina's projects and future for infrastructure, that's going to make a lot of difference. That's why I said, well, the Marshall Plan had a lot of leadership from the US. And thanks to that, it helped a region that was in big trouble at the time. And I think that's more or less where Argentina is at this point, trying to find its own image in the world. And then the other issue, which I just mentioned superficially, I'm sorry, I'm not a political scientist, but when you said the Peronist opposition, you must remember what Peron said. We are all Peronists down there. You know, that's not opposition. Momentarily, we may look like we are not there. But there's kind of a, well, that was a joke, of course. Yes. But
you're going to be quoted.
Some of us are not Peronists. And I can run into trouble now when I go back.
Okay, yeah, well skirted. I like the way you skirted around that question. I want to just get a couple of comments from Roque Fernandez and Esther Talvi. But did you want to make a point, Alberto? Roque first, and Esther, and Alberto.
Yeah, maybe just taking what Guillermo says, and there was a question related also, what about the private sector, and what are the political economy thinking that we can consider Argentina toward the future. I think that in this last issue, when even we have not written in the report several paragraphs about the political economy of Argentina, we discussed that a lot, okay? And the point is that it's very, very difficult to deal with the political economy issue without being a little bit normative, or perhaps we will move away from a positive statement in the sense that we try to describe what is going on in Argentina, what are going to be the impacts in the future, and what could happen with the markets. And that is what we have been focusing all the reports, not only this one, but it doesn't mean that we couldn't take the political economy. By the way, I think that if you look at the gradualism discussion in the report, obviously the opposite to that would be a shock treatment of several of these problems, and we have done that in the past, and we have argued in terms of smoothing out the adjustment to minimize net social cost. That is really political economy in the sense that we believe that some of the shock therapy that could be instrumented in order to go far ahead in the reforms that are badly needed in Argentina will affect the governability of the government. And so those issues were considered, and I think that what Guillermo mentioned is that we are all Peronists in the sense that the populism in Argentina is not limited to the Peronist party. All other parties in Argentina, even the socialists and the radical party, has a lot of populism going on inside of those parties. So in that sense, I think that we should be very, very careful in keeping the adjustment, the social adjustment cost at the minimum possible to keep democracy going on. So I think that the most important result in this election is that we have been able to get out of a populism that was for about 10 years without a revolution, without a coup state. So we just going through a democratic process, we were able to put ahead or put back some of these populist practices that were very bad for Argentina and the region. And finally, the private sector issue is that part of the modifications that are expected to be introduced in the future, especially with tax reform, are badly needed for promoting the more activity in the private sector. So the tax burden that we have in Argentina at the present time is huge. So the private sector is exhausted of supporting the government. So in the future, I think that advancing in the tax reform, the private sector will have been much more active in the future.
Okay, Roque, thank you. Ernesto, then Alberto, 1 minute each, please, because I want to get a couple more questions.
1 minute. Danny, I fully agree with you. Actually, the editorial you were asking for, it is already written. It's called Time for Intelligent Austerity. And actually, the suggestion is to mobilize resources in a world where you have very high liquidity and, as Guillermo says, a very scarce supply of safe assets, to mobilize resources in a ways that you can fund productive investments in the emerging economies, including in human capital, as Pablo was saying, by mobilizing resources using the current institutions, maybe in creative ways. But this is, you talked about the Marshall Plan. We are talking about helicopter money today. Helicopter money is not a very complicated idea. It's actually a very primitive idea, sending an army of helicopters to drop dollar bills. The innovative aspect of it is that we are really thinking of doing it. We thought we were limited to textbooks on that. So time for intelligent austerity, I don't think is that innovative in terms of how do you do it, but the fact that you should be doing this huge mobilization of resources through the creation of safe assets via multilaterals in ways that the private capital would be interested in investing in infrastructure and human capital in emerging economies.
Okay, Alberto.
I would like to address the private sector question, which I think is central. I think the most important challenge that Argentina faces, not only Argentina, but mainly Argentina, and since we're talking about Argentina, is the way to engage the private sector in reconstructing several areas. Physical equity has been the Marshall Plan idea sounds very nice because it's a sort of a very rapid reconstruction of a destruction that took place. So I would say that the reconstruction of equity is the central challenge facing. In the way of reconstructing equity, which disappeared during the last decade or so, you have the challenge of generating credible institutions and credible incentives for the private sector to take the task. And I think that the construction of credibility goes through several processes which are extremely complex. And I think one important area that has to be thought about is to construct bridges while the regulatory environment is reconstructed. For instance, the structure of relative prices is reconstructed and to match the structure of marginal costs in the economy, while the rule of law, the property rights, et cetera, that have been seriously affected are reconstructed. There is not enough time. So you have to think about institutions that very rapidly are able to generate trust on the part of the private sector. Without that trust, it will be difficult for the gradualist approach to succeed.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to get 2 more questions in. This gentleman's had his hand up for a long time, and then you, sir. And I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions. It's out. There will be a reception afterwards, so you can buttonhole the committee members yourself.
Thank you for insightful talk. My name is Alex. I study public policy at GW as a Fulbright scholar.
Are you a student of Danny Light?
No, maybe not yet. My question is related to 2 things that plague all developing economies, and according to some scant readings I've done, they have been problem of Argentina too, and actually they have been best researched by Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto, which are the shadow economy and corruption, and these two phenomena are sucking away a lot of resources, and according to some estimates, something like $8 trillion left developing countries over the last 10 years. The Panama Papers have shed some light on this, and I've seen that the president is thinking about initiating some corruption investigations. How do you think, are these problems really preeminent? How much time and effort will the new government devote to them? And do they deserve, in your opinion, more attention, maybe even more attention than attention of international investors? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And last question to this gentleman over here.
Fred Jasperson. Hello, yes. Hi, Fred Jasperson. I have no affiliation. Is the microphone working? Yeah, okay. The committee has explained very well the enormous benefits, social and efficiency benefits from gradualism. Of course, the success of gradualism will depend on its sustainability. It's just a truism. I wonder if the committee could share with us some of its views and discussion about the political situation and whether, in fact, Mr. Macri will have the political support to carry out and sustain gradualism. I'm thinking of the congressional elections that come up a year and a half from now, and I particularly welcome some comment on Argentina's experience with gradualism.
Great, okay, thank you very much. Seeing as we've had no questions from women, I'm going to direct these to Liliana, these questions. Oh, okay, let's get this last question.
That's good.
This is going to be the last question. It better be a great question, okay?
Hi, my name is Gisela Garcia. I'm with the World Bank at the Independent Evaluation Office. I'm Argentinian and economist. So my question is to Guillermo Calvo. It's like you mentioned about, you relate assets, safe assets to Argentina. And to me, that's science fiction, honestly. I mean, I wish, I mean, we will be there, but I mean, at some point, I guess. But I think this is complicated, at least now. So can you maybe articulate the three top reasons why you think Argentina is more credible now, or will be? It's just about the 100 days and the difference to the previous government, or it's something else?
Okay.
Can Guillermo answer first and then I go?
Yeah. You want to take that question first?
Yes.
That's a very easy question, of course. I'm talking about the environment. And the environment in Wall Street is not produced by Argentina alone. But there is the issue of being in an asset class. So you have people working and communicating and having a drink after hours in Wall Street that are working on Latin America and emerging markets, and so certain things, there is stuff like contagion. So I agree fully with you that if you take seriously the expression safe assets, Argentina is still far from that. Is it safer than before? I would say yes. Is it going into a safer ground? Probably so, and that depends on credibility. So my main point is that that's something that should not be left aside completely. Maybe a little bit more credibility now has a much bigger payoff than in the past. Now, having said that, I cannot disagree with you in your bold statement, unfortunately.
Liliana?
Yes. Okay, quickly on the two questions. On the issue of informality, clearly all the recommendations from the committee have been oriented toward motivating the private sector to also move towards the formal sector of the economy. Remember that Argentina has been working with many informal markets, including the fact that there was a parallel exchange rate, right? So many of the transactions were actually taking place aside. And not only that, there was no transparency in terms of prices, right? I mean, what is the real inflation in Argentina? What's the real GDP in Argentina? That's called informality, right? And lack of institutions, all right. All the recommendations are directed towards correcting that, towards move the behavior of the private sectors toward a formal system where proper regulation can be applied, where citizens pay taxes because they are in the formal sector. So our recommendation have that in mind. I'm not an Argentinian, and therefore it's more difficult, Fred, to answer, of course, what is the exact situation, the political situation in Argentina and the constraints. But let me make something very clear. You have no idea, for the 3 days that we have been, as Rajesh said, without, well, actually the weather was awful, so it was not that bad, right? So, but during those 3 days, a word that continuously came to us was, all right, how do you balance the fact that you have elections coming up, legislative elections, of course, coming up, in 3 months, right? In 2017, sorry, in 2017, which actually may undermine the capacity of the government, the results may undermine the capacity of the government to continue doing reforms, with the fact that you actually want the government to make those reforms. So every time, and that's actually one of the reasons why we went for gradualism too, because we paid an enormous attention to the fact that you cannot exacerbate the social costs of the reforms. There are always social costs of the reforms. If you alienate the population, if you alienate the electorate, they're going to vote against you, and therefore the reforms that are needed are not going to take place. So yes, the political issue was always in the back of our heads, but we tried to have a report that was going to be as positive as many of here in the committee have mentioned, as positive as possible, trying to keep it clean. The political background is there, but our judgments and exposition and fundamentals have a solid economic background. Thank you.
Okay, let's get one last point from Pablo, and then we'll finish.
Let me just address the political situation. So, Macri wins the election in the ballotage with a very tiny percentage of votes above the candidate that was representing the former government. And many argue that the choice of some of the candidates around the main candidate was actually what made it possible for Macri to win, but it could have been the other way around, okay? So after that, I think that the political dynamics in Argentina are going to be central, okay? And the Macri government, in principle, in the numbers, doesn't have a majority, has actually a minority in both chambers of Congress, okay? But maybe the main development that has occurred is the dismemberment of the portion of the Peronist party that was associated with the former government, and part of this dismemberment is also associated with a number of massive corruption schemes that are coming out, where really the solution or the expectation is that actually is whether the justice system is going to be fast enough to actually prosecute and convict many of the people involved in those schemes. But essentially the main development is that now, if you look at the Peronist party, you have 3 components. One that was already the opposition and was the party around Massa, who was sort of the third candidate. And then of the rest, it has been divided in 2 blocks: the staunch Kirchneristas, which have essentially lost a significant amount of power, and a portion of Peronists that have no leader currently, but have 3 or 4 representatives. Among some of them, the governor of Salta, Urtubey, and other 2 or 3 people. So the question for the Macri government, the Macri government, for instance, won in Congress the approval of these 2 laws that were needed to settle the situation with holdouts with a vast majority. And that vast majority, even if they have a minority, came about because of the support of the Massa party, part of the Peronists, and this other part of the Peronists that split from the the Kirchneristas.
Pablo, I'm going to ask you to summarize your point,
Yes.
please.
So the situation now is like a honeymoon, okay? Because essentially Macri is getting some support, but that is only a matter of time until the Peronists, the non-Kirchner Peronists, will actually eventually unite. It's unlikely that they will unite for the Congress elections in 2017, but certainly they will unite for the presidential elections of 2019. So I would say the dynamics are going to be crucial. I think that the loss of power and popularity of Kirchner will actually help Macri in the congressional elections of 2017, and we'll see by how much. But the window of opportunity for reforms in Argentina for this government with this composition of Congress essentially is about a year and a half, 2 years maximum.
Okay, final point, Liliana. In 30 seconds, President Macri's watching, let's assume. How do you want him, and how do you want people here to consume this report?
Yes, basically, you should look at this report as an optimist view of what Argentina is going into, but at the same time, raising caution about how to do it. We are very aware of the political constraints facing Argentina. We are very aware of the external adverse environment facing emerging markets in general and Argentina in particular. And we are very aware of the limitations of policies that can be taken. And therefore, our most important recommendations are in two fronts. As I mentioned, gradual policies while building credibility. Without the two components, we don't think this is going to work. But with the two components working together, our view about the future of Argentina is quite positive.
Okay. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, the report is on our website. Many of you have it now. We invite you to share it, leave comments on the website, cgdev.org. We have some lunch laid out for you back there. You can carry on your conversations with the committee members there, but please give them a very big round of applause to say thank you. Thank you. I don't.